The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was a place of immense power, filled with representatives of species who had shaped the fate of the galaxy for millennia. This was where decisions were made, alliances formed, and conflicts settled. The council chamber was alive with the soft hum of alien conversations, the flickering of holograms, and the quiet shuffle of attendants. In the center of it all, seated with calm dignity, were the most powerful beings in the galaxy. But today there was a newcomer, a human delegation, representing Earth, sitting at the far end of the chamber. Their presence was met with indifferent stares and the occasional dismissive glance. To the other members of the council, humanity was still a relatively young species, a mere speck in the vastness of the galaxy. While humans had made remarkable technological advances in a short period, they were still considered beneath the ancient races that had controlled the stars for centuries. Humanity's rise was seen as an anomaly, an event that would pass with time. Earth's representatives, though confident, could feel the weight of this condescension as they sat silently waiting for the summit to begin. The first speaker, a towering Zorak leader with shimmering silver skin and sharp angular features, stood to address the assembly. His voice echoed through the chamber, deep and authoritative, as he outlined the goals of the Council's new peace initiative. His words were meant to be comforting, designed to reassure the gathered species that this was the beginning of a new era, one of unity, peace, and prosperity for all. But as he continued, his gaze fell on the humans. There was a sneer on his lips that the humans couldn't ignore. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it grew with each passing sentence. He began to mock Earth's contributions to the galaxy, dismissing their technological achievements as childish experiments. He ridiculed humanity's attempts to maintain peace and order, calling them naive and foolish. The galaxy, he said with a chuckle, has no need for inexperienced species who think they can solve problems they don't even understand. The chamber fell silent, but the implication of his words hung heavily in the air. The other council members exchanged knowing glances, some smirking, others trying to hide their amusement. They had heard this kind of talk before. Humanity was a species that had fought for survival, and, against all odds, had managed to make its mark. But their place at the table had never been fully accepted. The Council's disdain for the humans was well known, and now, in this public forum, it was undeniable. The human leader, a calm and composed individual named James Calloway, was the first to speak. He was not one to anger easily, but today, even his patience was beginning to wear thin. He stood slowly, his voice steady but firm, addressing the council with the kind of authority that came from a lifetime of leadership. "We may not have the ancient history of your species," Calloway began, his eyes scanning the room, "but we have the future on our side. We are not the children you think us to be. You would do well to remember that." The Zorak leader scoffed, dismissing Calloway's words with a wave of his hand. "Future," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You barely understand the present. How can you claim to control the future?" But Calloway did not flinch. Instead, he spoke in a calm, measured tone, a stark contrast to the increasingly hostile atmosphere. "The future doesn't need to be controlled," he said. "It needs to be understood. And that, gentlemen, is something humanity excels at." His words were not the explosive response many might have expected. But what happened next sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. Calloway's calmness, the deliberate restraint in his voice, seemed to imply something far more dangerous than mere words. The Zorak leader, feeling the weight of the silence that followed, narrowed his eyes, his arrogance starting to falter. This was not the reaction he had been expecting. Then, just as Calloway finished speaking, a sudden flicker of light erupted in the center of the chamber. A strange disturbance surged through the room, unnoticed at first by most. But in the blink of an eye, the entire hall was plunged into darkness. The hum of energy that powered the council chamber systems went silent, leaving only the faint sounds of startled murmurs in the dark. Panic spread as security systems blinked to life, but the disturbance was too quick. It was a brief moment, But it was enough. In that fleeting instant, something shifted in the room. The council members, once so confident in their superiority, were now on edge. They were no longer sure of their dominance. Humanity had spoken, but it was clear that there was more beneath the surface. They had seen something in Calloway's eyes, a flicker of power, of knowledge, that made them uneasy. What the council didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The lights flickered back on, and the assembly was left in stunned silence. No one dared speak. The atmosphere had changed, and the weight of what had just happened hung in the air like a storm cloud. Calloway took his seat once more, his expression unreadable. The Zorak leader, who had once been so sure of himself, now sat frozen, staring at the humans with a new level of caution. The council continued, but the words seemed empty. No one could ignore the tension that had been introduced. Humanity had not reacted as they had expected. Instead of backing down, they had shown restraint, their power hidden just beneath the surface. For the first time, the galaxy's most powerful species were forced to consider a terrifying thought. Maybe humanity wasn't as weak as they had assumed. And as the summit continued, no one could shake the feeling that something larger, something darker, was waiting to unfold. The humans had been insulted, humiliated, and dismissed, but they were not broken. The galaxy was about to learn that underestimating humanity was a mistake no one would ever forget. The question now was, what would humanity do next? The summit continued. The mood in the council chamber shifted from one of mockery to unease. The representatives of the galaxy's most powerful species had dismissed humanity for far too long, and now they were starting to feel the weight of that mistake. The humans had sat in silence after Calloway's words, their eyes unwavering and calm. But in that silence, the galaxy's leaders began to realize that they were facing something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. Back on Earth, far from the watchful eyes of the Galactic Council, a series of private meetings had begun. In the heart of Earth's capital, high-ranking officials gathered in secret, discussing their next move. Earth had always been seen as the underdog in the galactic order, a young species with an untested history in the greater scheme of things. But the humans had their own advantages. Advantages the Council didn't understand. They had something the galaxy's leaders lacked, resilience. And they had something else, an uncanny ability to adapt and overcome. The human government, despite all of its progress and technological advancements, had always been cautious in its dealings with the larger galactic community. They had been welcomed into the Council, yes, but they had never truly been embraced. Now, after the insult that had been leveled at them, that careful diplomacy was about to come to an end. Humanity's leaders were ready to take the first steps toward a new future, one where they would no longer be passive players in the galactic game. In the hidden depths of Earth's defense network, teams of scientists, engineers, and military leaders were working tirelessly on a project that had been kept secret from the rest of the galaxy. This project, however, was not simply about defense or building more advanced weapons. It was about power, cosmic power. Humanity had developed a technology unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While the other species relied on advanced spaceships, weaponry, and psychic abilities to maintain their dominance, the humans had cracked the code to something far more terrifying: the manipulation of space-time itself. This technology could tear apart the very fabric of reality, create black holes, and bend the universe's natural laws to their will. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, but it wasn't just for warfare. It was humanity's insurance policy. The project, known only to a select few, was called the Event Horizon Initiative. Back on the Council's homeworld, the members were beginning to discuss the human delegation's bold statement. What had started as a simple insult now felt like something much more significant. The Zorak leader, still recovering from his earlier defeat, pushed for a swift response. His people had long prided themselves on their psychic abilities, and their pride had been wounded in front of all the other council members. But the Shalak, who were known for their tactical genius and military prowess, took a more cautious approach. The Shalak representative, a calculating and cold-minded individual named Tarek, had been observing the humans closely. He knew that underestimating humanity would be a grave mistake. The humans had shown restraint, but there was something about the way Calloway had spoken that suggested they were hiding something. Tarek began to suspect that the humans had not only been insulted by the Council, but had been preparing for this very moment. Tarek's suspicion was soon confirmed. Word from one of the Galactic Council's informants revealed that humanity had been secretly developing new technologies so advanced, so unlike anything seen before, that they could change the balance of power in the galaxy. This was not a simple military response to an insult. Humanity was planning something much larger. The Shalak understood the potential consequences of this. If the humans had something that could disrupt the entire galaxy, then the Council's hold over the universe would be at risk. But despite the growing concern, the Galactic Council refused to believe that humanity had anything that could truly threaten them. The Shalak's warning was dismissed as paranoia. The other species, like the Vorgan and the Drath, were more concerned about the immediate disruptions in their territories than the distant threat of human retaliation. The situation was about to change in ways no one could predict. Late one night, in the heart of Earth's military command center, the final test of the Event Horizon Initiative was about to begin. A small group of military officers, along with the top scientific minds, prepared the device, a massive energy-draining engine capable of manipulating space-time. They activated the device, and the world's largest particle accelerator hummed to life. As the countdown began, the team held their breath. The moment the device reached full power, a rift opened in space. The sky above the testing facility shimmered as reality itself began to distort. The very fabric of space-time bent and twisted, the atmosphere vibrating as though the planet were shaking. It wasn't just a test, it was a signal. The device was operational. But what happened next was far beyond anyone's expectations. As the rift expanded, it wasn't just a small tear, it began to grow. In the distant corners of the galaxy, systems began to feel the effects. Communication systems across entire sectors of space flickered and failed. Ships, once sure of their paths, found themselves pulled into unpredictable orbits. Some force, had been unleashed, and it was spreading. Back in the Galactic Council's chambers, the first signs of panic began to show. The Council was still embroiled in debates, dismissing humanity as a minor annoyance, when suddenly their systems went dark. A sharp, high-pitched noise echoed across the chamber, followed by a flicker of light. Holographic displays, once perfectly synchronized, now scrambled and malfunctioned. The entire council room went still, and a cold shiver ran down every spine present. The peace they had worked for so long to maintain was beginning to unravel. Tarek, the Shalak representative, was the first to realize the connection. He stood up, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "It's the humans," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising panic. "They've activated the Event Horizon Initiative." The Council, caught off guard by the sudden turn of events, was now faced with the harsh reality. Humanity's response had not been a simple show of defiance. It was an act of power, one that had shaken the galaxy to its core. No one had expected humanity to retaliate in this way. No one had anticipated that a species they thought so insignificant would wield the kind of power that could fracture the very laws of the universe. And so, the galaxy stood on the brink. The leaders of the Galactic Council were realizing, far too late, that they had made a terrible mistake. Humanity had not been broken by their insults. Instead, they had been transformed into a force that no one could ignore. The question now was no longer whether the galaxy could remain united, but whether it could survive the chaos that humanity had unleashed. As the galaxy's most powerful species scrambled to understand what had just happened, a growing sense of fear spread through the Council. The Zorak, Drath, Vorgan, and every other race present had lived under the assumption that they controlled the galaxy's fate, that their centuries-old alliances and technologies made them untouchable. But now, in the wake of humanity's unexpected move, the very foundation of their power seemed to be crumbling. Across the stars, ships were lost, communications were cut off, and even the most advanced systems faltered under the strange and unknown disturbance. Back on Earth, the crisis was only beginning. Humanity had awoken something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The Event Horizon Initiative, humanity's secret weapon, was still operating, and its effects were spreading like wildfire. It was no longer just a localized experiment. The rift in space-time was growing, and its influence was beginning to distort the very fabric of the galaxy itself. The human leaders on Earth watched with both awe and trepidation as their world-changing invention began to unravel the order of the universe. They knew the risk of this technology, but what they hadn't expected was the sheer magnitude of its power. The device was not just a weapon. It was a force that could unmake the galaxy itself. Humanity had taken the first step, and now there was no turning back. In the heart of the Galactic Council, panic had fully set in. For the first time, the leaders of these ancient species were forced to confront the reality that humanity, despite their relative youth and limited history in galactic politics, was not as powerless as they had assumed. No one had anticipated that the humans, insulted and underestimated, would harness a force so potent it could fracture the delicate balance of galactic power. The once proud council was now on the edge of collapse. The council's top scientists and military leaders were summoned to address the rapidly escalating situation. A special emergency session was called, where the various leaders discussed the catastrophic effects the rift was having on their territory. What was once seen as an inconsequential disturbance was now threatening to spread across the galaxy. It was as if the fabric of space itself had been torn apart. Communications between star systems were failing, ships were being pulled into unpredictable gravitational forces, and entire sectors of the galaxy were slowly being cut off from the rest of civilization. But still, the council leaders refused to believe that humanity could be behind this disaster. Surely, they thought, the humans didn't have the power to cause such a massive disturbance. They had only just entered galactic politics, and their technology, while impressive, was still considered primitive compared to the ancient species that had ruled the stars for centuries. No, there must be another explanation. There had to be. However, the evidence was mounting, and soon it became impossible to deny. The Shalak representative, Tarek, who had been one of the few to initially suspect the humans, now stood at the front of the room, his expression grim. "We were wrong," he said, his voice quiet but filled with weight. "The humans didn't just respond to an insult. They have weaponized the very laws of nature itself." His words hung in the air like a dark cloud. The other council members shifted uneasily, their earlier arrogance beginning to fade into the shadows. The Vorgan leader, a being known for its cold and logical demeanor, spoke up, his voice trembling. "But how could this have happened? How could we have missed it? We have watched them closely, monitored their progress. There were no signs that they had developed this kind of technology." Tarek looked at him, his expression hardening. "Because you underestimated them. You assumed that humanity would always be a lesser power. You mocked them. You dismissed them. And now, we're all paying the price." In the depths of the council chamber, the heads of the galactic military forces began to take action. They had to contain the growing threat. The human weapon, whatever it was, had the potential to destabilize the entire galaxy. The council could not allow a single species to wield that kind of power. If humanity had unlocked the ability to manipulate space-time, they were no longer just a member of the galactic community. They had become a force that could reshape the galaxy in their image. Orders were given to begin preparations for a counter-offensive. Military fleets would be mobilized, and the council would employ every weapon at their disposal to stop the spread of the rift. The humans had made their move, and now the galaxy's leaders were about to make theirs. But in the back of the council chamber, a small group of dissenters from the Vorgan and Shalak species began to wonder, what if humanity was not the enemy? In a quiet, undisclosed location on Earth, Callaway, The human leader who had made that bold statement at the summit stood in front of the monitor, watching as the rift continued to expand. His face was a mask of calm, but beneath the surface, his mind raced. This was the moment humanity had prepared for. But now that they had taken this first step, there was no turning back. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. The Council would never see them as insignificant again. But the cost of this move, the risk of the universe spiraling into chaos, was something that weighed heavily on Calloway's shoulders. The final test of humanity's power had been completed. The galaxy was now in turmoil. What followed would be a struggle for survival, a battle not just for control of the galaxy, but for the very soul of the universe itself. Humanity had become a force to be reckoned with, but whether that force would bring salvation or destruction was yet to be seen. As the galactic leaders prepared their countermeasures, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something they had never encountered before, something not just dangerous, but intelligent. Humanity had woken up, and now, the galaxy had no idea how to deal with the consequences. In the cold, dark expanse of space, the rift in space-time continued to grow, its tendrils reaching out to consume everything in its path. And no one, not even the most powerful beings in the galaxy, could predict what would happen next. The galaxy's leaders had begun to prepare for the worst, but the enormity of the situation was still beyond their comprehension. The rift that humanity had opened up, through their mysterious technology, had spread across systems, destabilizing the very fabric of reality. Star systems once perfectly aligned with the laws of physics and time were now unpredictable, fractured. Ships were being pulled out of hyperspace, stranded between dimensions, while entire fleets had vanished without a trace. Entire cities, spanning vast planets, were affected by strange anomalies. Gravity fluctuated, time warped, and communications went silent. The Galactic Council was paralyzed by its inability to cope with the magnitude of the threat. The Zorak leader, Zorak, had been the first to push for immediate military action. His species, notorious for their psychic powers, were used to bending others to their will, but now they were powerless against the forces at play. "We must destroy them," he growled, his eyes burning with the rage of a species that was not used to being defied. "We cannot allow humanity to wield this kind of power. If we do not strike them down, they will consume us all." But Tarek, the Shalak representative, was more measured. His cold, calculating mind had seen what others had failed to see. Humanity wasn't like the others. They didn't just rely on military might, psychic powers, or ancient technology. They had something else, something the other species had overlooked. Sheer ingenuity, adaptability, and an ability to find solutions where none seemed to exist. "It's not just about fighting them," Tarek replied, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "It's about understanding them. We've underestimated humanity at every turn, but we cannot afford to make that mistake again." Despite the mounting pressure, the Council's leadership still couldn't fathom the depth of humanity's capabilities. The response had been swift, but each countermeasure only seemed to make matters worse. Military fleets dispatched to investigate or contain the disturbance simply disappeared or returned reporting anomalies that could not be explained. Nothing seemed to work. At the heart of Earth's government, the highest-ranking officials were beginning to feel the strain of what they had unleashed. Calloway, who had been the voice of humanity's defiance during the summit, found himself in a quiet room overlooking a panoramic view of Earth's cities, now eerily calm under the night sky. He had played his part in creating the Event Horizon initiative, but now the full weight of its consequences bore down on him. He had expected conflict, yes, but not on this scale. Humanity had become the catalyst for a chain of events that no one could have predicted. What had been a gesture of pride and defiance against the Galactic Council had evolved into a force that might change the very nature of the universe. Yet, despite his reservations, Calloway still believed in the rightness of humanity's decision. The Council had insulted them, undermined their place in the galactic community. For centuries, Humanity had been at the mercy of these ancient species. It was time to take control of their own fate. But what if, in doing so, they had awakened something even more dangerous than the Council? As Calloway pondered the future, Earth's scientific teams were hard at work, analyzing the rift. Their initial tests had been promising. There was potential to harness its power, to use it as a source of energy, or even to manipulate the very laws of physics. But with the growing instability, they weren't sure if such control was even possible anymore. The Event Horizon Initiative had been humanity's secret weapon, yes, but it was becoming something far larger than they had intended. If left unchecked, it might rip apart entire star systems, and eventually, the universe itself. The Galactic Council's response, though slow, was beginning to take shape. Fleets of ships, each more powerful than the last, were being prepared for deployment. They would not rest until they had neutralized humanity's threat. But as the forces of the Council moved into position, strange reports began to trickle in. The anomalies caused by the rift were not just confined to the immediate area around Earth. Systems, light years away from the human homeworld, were being affected. Distortions in time and space were beginning to ripple through the galaxy. In one of the outer systems, a team of Council scientists aboard a research station on the planet Ryloth noticed something terrifying. The rift had begun to grow, not just in size, but in power. It was as if the fabric of reality itself was unraveling, extending its reach into other systems. Time was starting to behave erratically. Ships traveling between distant planets began to notice the strange phenomenon. Time was slipping away, as if the universe itself was being sucked into a black hole. It was clear. Whatever humanity had done was no longer just a problem for Earth. It was a problem for the entire galaxy. The Zorak, seeing the growing danger, called for immediate action. "We cannot wait any longer," their leader, Zorak, declared. "Humanity's defiance is pushing the boundaries of the universe itself. The longer we wait, the worse it will become." But Tarek stood firm. He saw the rift, yes, but he also saw the bigger picture. If we strike them down now, we may not just be ending humanity's rise. We may be ending the galaxy's future altogether. Tarek's warning fell on deaf ears as the Council rushed to mobilize their fleets. But the stakes were higher than they realized. The rift was no longer just a human weapon. It had become a force of nature. And the more the Council tried to contain it, the further it spread. On Earth, Calloway was receiving reports from across the galaxy. The Event Horizon Initiative, the secret weapon humanity had developed, had opened something they couldn't fully comprehend. The universe was spiraling into chaos. The question was no longer if the Council would retaliate. It was whether humanity could survive the coming storm. As humanity's power grew, so too did the fear among the Council members. The fabric of space and time was being stretched and twisted beyond anything they had ever experienced. What had started as a diplomatic insult was now a galactic crisis, and with every passing moment, it became clearer that humanity was no longer the underdog. They had become the very thing the galaxy feared most, a force of nature. And they were only just getting started. As the chaos continued to spiral across the galaxy, the Galactic Council's panic began to grow deeper. Tensions between the various species reached new heights. The once cohesive force that had ruled over the galaxy for centuries now found itself fractured, its power broken. The leaders, who had once been so sure of their superiority over humanity, now scrambled to contain a force they couldn't even begin to understand. On the battlefield, the situation was becoming increasingly desperate. The Council's military fleets, advanced beyond anything humanity had at its disposal, were being torn apart by the same anomalies that had started at Earth. Ships that ventured too close to the epicenter of the rift vanished into nothingness, as though they were swallowed by the universe itself. Even the strongest of fleets, commanded by the Zorak and Drath, who were known for their brutal tactics and overwhelming firepower, were unable to predict the path of the rift's growing influence. The military commanders were beginning to suspect that the galaxy's greatest defense might not lie in their advanced weaponry or their superior forces, but in the very thing they had mocked for so long: humanity's unpredictability. The humans, small in number, inexperienced in galactic politics, and barely touched by the ancient history of the galaxy, had somehow gained the ability to control the very forces of nature that kept the galaxy intact. Back on Earth, the situation was far from stable. Calloway, still overseeing the Event Horizon Initiative, was becoming more aware of the magnitude of the consequences. He had made the decision to expose humanity to the galaxy's politics, to pull away from the Galactic Council's reach. But now that humanity had opened a rift capable of destabilizing the universe, the cost was higher than he could have ever imagined. What they had done to humiliate the Council, to claim their place in the galactic order, was slowly turning into something far more dangerous. In the war rooms of Earth, the leaders were divided. Some wanted to push forward, to keep asserting their dominance, to prove that humanity had the right to exist without the Council's oppression. Others, more cautious, saw the risk in what they had unleashed. The rift was not just a weapon. It was a living, breathing thing. A force they couldn't control, a wild card that could turn on them at any moment. The question now wasn't whether humanity would survive the Council's retaliation. It was whether the galaxy itself could survive the rift humanity had created. Turek, the Shalak representative, had been the first to see the true scope of the damage humanity had done. From his cold, analytical perspective, the rift wasn't just a tool or a weapon. It was a breach in the very fabric of space-time, and its effects were now spreading uncontrollably. It was the ultimate gamble, a dangerous risk that humanity had taken, and one that the Council could not ignore. Still, there were whispers within the Council. Some wondered if the rift, as dangerous as it was, could be used. There were ancient texts, dating back eons, that spoke of civilizations before the current galactic order, of species that had harnessed the power of space-time. If humanity could survive long enough to control it, they might become the most powerful species in the galaxy. The question was no longer one of conquest. It was one of survival. Who would control the rift? Who would emerge as the dominant force in the universe? But not everyone in the Council was ready to entertain such a thought. The Zorak were already formulating plans to strike. They had the strongest military force, and they were determined to use it to crush humanity before they became too powerful. We will not allow them to control us. Zorak snarled, his hands clenched into fists. We will find the source of this disturbance and destroy it before it destroys us. The Vorgan, a race known for their ability to communicate with the stars themselves, had a different opinion. The leader, a calm and wise being named Senner, suggested that perhaps the Council needed to work with humanity. We have always seen them as lesser, but they have shown us a power we have not understood. Senner said, his voice calm but filled with the weight of truth. What if, instead of opposing them, we learned from them? What if humanity is the key to stopping the rift? But Senner's words fell on deaf ears. Fear and pride had already taken root in the hearts of the Council's leaders. The idea of collaborating with humanity was unthinkable to many, especially now that humanity had become the wild card in the galaxy, a force they could not control. On Earth, the human response was a mix of confusion, fear, and determination. People across the planet began to realize the full weight of their leaders' actions. The Event Horizon Initiative was humanity's most closely guarded secret. No one had anticipated that it could ever grow to this level, but now that it had, humanity had to decide how to proceed. The rift was still expanding, and humanity's power was undeniable, but the price of that power was steep. As the Galactic Council scrambled to contain the rift, humanity now had to ask itself whether it had become the galaxy's savior or its greatest threat. If they didn't find a way to control the rift, or to close it, they would be the ones to trigger the end of the galaxy's order. The ultimate question that hung over the galaxy was this: would humanity, having stirred the galaxy's sleeping power, be the catalyst for a new era? Or would they, in their defiance, bring about the destruction of everything they had fought for? Back in the Council chambers, a tense silence settled. Every leader understood that the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. The rift could be their salvation, or it could be their doom. They had only one choice left: decide how to deal with humanity, and whether they could stop the rift before it tore everything apart. And as the Council prepared its final moves, they knew that the endgame had begun. The galaxy was no longer the same. The question was, would anyone survive the fallout? The galaxy's fate now hung in the balance. Every leader, every general, and every strategist knew that humanity had become something entirely different, something they couldn't quite fathom or contain. With the Event Horizon Initiative spiraling out of control, the Galactic Council was faced with a brutal reality. Their centuries of dominance, their carefully constructed order, was crumbling before their eyes. Humanity had done something no one had anticipated, something they couldn't fully understand. And in their arrogance, the Council had underestimated the one species they thought would never pose a true threat. The Council's military forces were being pulled from every corner of the galaxy, their once unified fleets now stretched thin and desperate. The chaos was no longer just isolated to Earth. Systems once safely tucked within the Council's grip were now suffering from the effects of the rift. Gravity fluctuations, time distortions, entire fleets lost. Some ships, after entering the zones around the rift, had simply vanished, leaving nothing behind. Worse still, the rift was spreading, expanding outward with a power that no one could stop. The Council was trying to fight back, but with every ship they sent to engage, another fleet was pulled into the anomaly. Back on Earth, the situation was becoming more desperate by the hour. Calloway, the human leader who had once boldly declared humanity's defiance against the Council, now found himself struggling with the enormity of what had been set in motion. He had thought the rift would be a powerful statement, a way for humanity to assert its place in the galaxy. But now, the rift was a threat to every living thing in the universe. Even humanity's greatest minds were beginning to despair. The Event Horizon Initiative, originally a tool designed to shift the balance of power, was now a living disaster. The rift had begun to grow far beyond the project's original intentions, its effects spilling out into distant corners of the galaxy, affecting entire star systems. Each passing moment only seemed to fuel the chaos. Scientists, engineers, and military officials from all over Earth gathered in the underground command centers, trying desperately to come up with a solution. But every theory was met with failure. Every plan only seemed to make the rift stronger. "We can't control it," one scientist said, her voice trembling. "We created it, but now it's creating its own path. Every time we try to redirect it, it's like it evolves, like it's learning from us." Calloway clenched his fists. He was a man who had fought his whole life to see humanity rise. But now, as the galaxy watched in terror, he realized that humanity's power came at an unbearable cost. What had started as a political move, a way to end the Council's oppressive rule, was now threatening to destroy everything they had worked for. "Is there any way to close it?" Calloway asked, looking toward his chief scientist, Dr. Reynolds, who had been one of the lead architects of the Event Horizon Initiative. Reynolds shook his head, his face lined with exhaustion. "We've tried everything, sir. We've sent teams to the rift's epicenter, but the closer they get, the more unstable the space-time fabric becomes. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The more we touch it, the more it slips away." Back in the Galactic Council, the leaders had reached a boiling point. Zorak, the Zorak leader, had pushed for an immediate full-scale military response. Their fleets were assembling in the outer regions, ready to launch a final strike against Earth. "We cannot allow humanity to control this chaos any longer," Zorak insisted. "If the rift is not destroyed, if humanity is not stopped, we will all suffer." But Tarek, the Shalak representative, urged caution. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of a truth that seemed too difficult to ignore. "If we strike now, we may destroy everything. We cannot take that risk. We don't even understand the full potential of the rift. What if humanity is already beyond our reach?" The debate among the council members raged on. Some were ready for war, believing the destruction of humanity was their only option. Others feared the consequences of such a move, knowing that the rift was more than just a weapon. It was something that could change the galaxy's very existence. The more they discussed it, the more the Council began to realize just how little they knew. Humanity had shown them a power unlike any they had ever seen, and now it was slipping through their fingers, out of control. Calloway had given his orders, but deep down, he understood that no military force in the galaxy could stop the rift. It was something far beyond their understanding. The rift wasn't just a physical anomaly. It was a tear in the very fabric of existence. And it was growing, expanding, devouring everything in its path. I don't know if we can stop it. Calloway admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability as he addressed his council of advisors. But we can't let the Council destroy us. We have to find a way to stabilize it, if that's even possible. Meanwhile, back at the Council, the leaders of the galaxy's great species were now more divided than ever. The Zorak were preparing their fleets to strike Earth. The Drath were considering an alliance with the Vorgan, hoping that the combined might of their forces could somehow control or suppress the rift. Yet even they knew it was a desperate move, a last-ditch effort to save their future. In the midst of this uncertainty, a small group of galactic scholars, the ones who had always been most skeptical of the Council's approach, began to speak out. They saw the rift not as a weapon to be feared, but as a key. They believed humanity had stumbled upon something more profound than anyone had realized. They believed that the rift, though dangerous, might be the gateway to a new understanding of the universe, one that could transcend the old rules that had governed the galaxy for millennia. The rift could be our salvation, one of the scholars proposed, her voice barely audible above the tension in the council chamber. If we can understand it, if we can work with it, rather than against it, we could unlock a new era for the galaxy. Humanity has shown us a glimpse of something beyond our comprehension. But their words were drowned out by the cacophony of voices calling for action, for destruction. The Council had made its decision. The time for diplomacy had ended. The galaxy would be remade, whether by the rift, by humanity, or by force. There was no turning back. And as the military fleets gathered in the outer reaches of the galaxy, humanity's leaders stood on the precipice of an uncertain future. What had begun as a bold statement, a rejection of the Galactic Council's tyranny, had become a pivotal moment in galactic history. Humanity had ignited a storm, and the question was no longer whether they could survive it, but whether anyone could. The rift was no longer just a symbol of defiance. It was a ticking clock, counting down to the moment when the galaxy would either be saved or undone.